principles.
Carry on, sir.
Anyway, Frank, that seems to be about enough about you. Let's get on and talk about this gas line.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, we don't need to talk about me at all. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you all. Again, I apologize for not being there in person, but I look forward to coming to Fairbanks soon to be able to visit with my friends up there. If we can, Jomo, let's move to slide number 2. Again, before I begin and talk about where we are with the Alaska LNG project, I want to give a brief overview of who AGDC is, or the Alaska Gasline Development Corporation. And we are a independent state corporation that was actually created by the Alaska State Legislature in 2013 with the sole premise of trying to provide gas to Alaskans and monetize Alaska's North Slope resources. And the reason that the state created the corporation was because that South Central Alaska and Interior Alaska were looking at high energy costs and potentially a significant impact from the reduction in Cook Inlet gas reserves, so that the legislature wanted to make sure that if there was an economic opportunity to develop a gas line to bring the North Slope natural gas reserves to Alaskans' use, then that's what we were developed or created to do. And we actually looked at making sure that we would only be able to proceed with an economically viable project. So over the ensuing, 6 years, we've worked on 2 projects. One is the in-state project, or the Alaska Standalone Pipeline Project. We've completed that effort with a FEED level, or front-end engineering and design, and also an environmental permit with the Army Corps of Engineers granting us the 404 permit to construct that project. And then now we are the sole owner of the Alaska LNG project, which was previously being developed with ExxonMobil, BP, Conoco, and TransCanada. So next slide, please, Jomo. As I described, the former work on the Alaska LNG project was initiated in 2014 with BP, Conoco, and ExxonMobil, and the state of Alaska representing TransCanada representing the state of Alaska. And that's where concept selection work was done and the Alaska LNG project was initiated. It was through the ensuing years until 2016 where a pre-front-end engineering and design effort was undertaken, and environmental documentation to develop a FERC application was produced by the producers. And in the end of 2016, though, that venture terminated, and the sole ownership was given by the producers to the state of Alaska at the request of former Governor Walker. So where we find ourselves now is in 2019, 3 years later, the state has been funding the entire effort to the Alaska LNG project up until this year, where we signed a cost-sharing agreement with BP and ExxonMobil. And this is where they've committed to providing AGDC each about 1/3 of the cost to complete the FERC process, which means getting it through the environmental review process and actually getting an authorization to construct. And they've pledged up to $10 million each. So it's really the first time that we've had new money coming in to support the state in advancing the project. In addition, they are providing us with very valuable resources in terms of subject matter experts within their organizations, so as that we push forward through the FERC process and their engineering data requests that come in that we would need to bring the latest and valuable engineering to respond to FERC's questions. We're able to draw on the resources of those companies and make sure that we're, again, complying with industry standards so that we're getting a project developed that will meet the needs of the international oil companies. So we really appreciate them coming forward, and it was actually a collaborative effort with the Denali administration to get the producers to participate and work with AGDC to accomplish this task. Next slide, please.
Frank, while we're here, this is Jomo. How much did the state spend when it was solely shouldering the burden, and is there any kind of credit that the state will accrue for that outlay?
So for the ensuing years from 2017, 2018, and 2019, I believe we've spent approximately $45 million. Now, that's just a rough estimate off the top of my head, but we've been averaging a little bit over $20 million a year to be able to do that. The previous 3 years, where the combined efforts of BP, Exxon, Conoco, and AGDC was a spend of $600 million. So we've significantly ramped down the spend, but our focus has really been on completing the FERC process, actually applying to FERC, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, but actually trying to de-risk the project by making sure that we can get through the major federal environmental process to assure that we have a viable project that will be permittable and constructible. So I'd be glad to provide more detailed numbers, but I don't have them off the top of my head right now.
Oh, no, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. So next slide, please. So what we have, and we are blessed as Alaska, we've been very fortunate to have been producing oil out of Prudhoe Bay and now associated developments farther to the west, oil for 40 years and being able to put that into taps to convey that liquid gold to market. But with the oil development has always been associated gas. And so that gas, specifically in Prudhoe Bay and now with Point Thompson, we're recycling over 8.5 billion cubic feet of gas a day that comes up with the oil and then has to be pressurized and put back into the reservoir. So the goal has always been, for the last 40 years, to commercialize that tremendous resource that has been stranded on the North Slope and be able to provide then an outlet for developers as they look for new oil but find associated gas and potentially a liability because then they have to process and re-inject, a way to get that to market. So Prudhoe Bay and Point Thompson, 35 trillion cubic feet of proven reserves. This is the proven reserves that will anchor the Alaska LNG project. And then we see that there's significant potential for additional conventional gas across the slope in the hundreds of trillions of cubic feet. And then when you start looking at the unconventionals with shale and hydrates, then you're really adding several hundreds, if not thousands of trillions of cubic feet of gas potential across the North Slope. What's interesting is that last year, a group called IHS Markit was looking at oil reserves around the world, and they dubbed super basins. And Prudhoe Bay and the North Slope was dubbed a super basin because it had produced, in excess of 10 billion barrels of oil equivalent, and had the potential for producing in excess of 5 billion more of barrel oil equivalent going forward. So that super basin designation, again, is really just a recognition of what we have, but also what we have going forward and the ability to utilize those resources for the good of Alaskans. Next slide, please. So just a quick recap on the Alaska LNG project. Again, the concept has been around for 40 years. This particular design premise calls for utilizing both Point Thompson and Prudhoe Bay at a 75-25 ratio. Those gases would be combined in Prudhoe Bay in a gas treatment plant where the carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide and other impurities would be removed and then re-injected back into the formation. So essentially sequestration of that CO2 rather than venting it into the environment. The treatment plant would have a capacity of up to 3.5 billion cubic feet a day, and then putting that into the pipeline which would traverse from Prudhoe Bay across the state of Alaska and then terminate in Nikiski, where we would develop a liquefaction facility that would take the nearly 2.7 billion cubic feet of gas, at that point liquefy it, and then put it into tankers for the open market. Now, I talked about the difference between the 3.3 or 3.5 billion cubic feet a day and the 2.7. We've reserved enough pipeline capacity for in-state 500 million cubic feet of in-state gas consumption. That's nearly double what we are currently consuming in the state, but our enabling legislation was to make sure that we had gas for Alaskans, and so we built that into the pipeline capacity. Now, where we are in this project, we've done the pre-FEED, or pre-front-end engineering and design. Like I say, that was a $600 million effort. There is additional engineering work that must go forward after we accomplish the FERC regulatory process that will conclude in June of next year. So quickly, that's just to recap that when we initially started the work, the cost estimate for this project ranged from $45 to $65 billion in 2014. At the end of 2016, after the work effort that was done, we were able to sharpen our pencils considerably and get it down to around $43 billion. Now, the work effort that we've done this year with BP and Exxon, looking at the viability, the economic viability of the project, and looking at the overall cost, we see that there are great opportunities to bring that cost down below $40 billion. And that has really to do with the engineering, fabrication, module construction that those oil companies have experienced over the last few years in their developments worldwide, and they're seeing some significant cost reducers. So next slide, please, Jim.
Questions?
I'll wait till we get a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Richards.
Right. So again, to the audience, if there are any questions that you have on particular slides, feel free to ask them. I'd be glad to address them as they come up.
He was prepped that we're a chatty group. Okay. All right, no questions, Mr. Richards.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So when we look at the Alaska LNG project, it really has benefits not only within the state of Alaska, but also to our nation. So for us within Alaska, it would be allowing for the liberation of those stranded natural gas assets and a potential new revenue source for not only the producers who would be developing the gas, but also for the state of Alaska through our royalty and production. As I said previously, any new exploration that goes on across the North Slope or in other basins really needs to have an avenue for associated gas. And with a pipeline traversing the state, we feel that this would be able to provide then access of any gas that is found to the world market. It also, we've built in as AGDC the ability for Alaskans to have easier access to the gas. And so we've built in multiple offtake opportunities along the pipeline. We've developed what those offtakes would essentially cost. And then we statutorily have the obligation to provide gas to Alaskans at commercially reasonable rates. So that's, again, the benefits that we see coming out of it. The environmental benefits, as I said previously, the sequestration of the carbon dioxide would be viewed in a positive light from an environmental perspective, and who knows where we're going with carbon capture and carbon credits, but it could potentially then be have an economic benefit to capture that carbon and sequester it. But for those that are relying on oil and coal and wood for home heating, providing natural gas would be hopefully a cleaner burning fuel and would allow for cleaner air, specifically for your community when you have those major inversions and the air quality goes down to terrible conditions. Next slide, please, Jim. So in specifics, when we look at the project and the overall spend for the project, we see that there will be a significant boost of spending, upwards of $7 billion for materials and services within the state. This would be spread out, from large businesses to small businesses to service providers, from transportation networks, the Alaska Railroad, to the ports and harbors, because goods and materials will need to flow into the state to be able to accommodate the 11,000 construction jobs that will be created to construct the project, and then ultimately about 1,000 jobs in terms of operating it. Now, Alaskans will play a major part of constructing this project, and that Alaskan companies will be put to work to do that. We see that there will be direct jobs that will be filled by Alaskans, and all available Alaskans will be able to be put to use that have the skill sets to be able to construct this project. So we see that as a major driver in terms of being able to provide jobs to Alaskans and then Alaskan companies to be able to support the project during the nearly 6-year construction timeframe. Next slide, please. So to the U.S., we see that the benefits of the project are fairly significant as well. Under President Trump, he's made American energy dominance a major theme of his administration. His cabinet has come to Alaska to support that and has identified, the way to energy dominance is through Alaska, and with essentially the development or continued development of our oil fields, but also the development of our natural gas and bringing that to market. So they've been very helpful in terms of addressing that and looking at how Alaska could fit into the energy portfolio. But once the project is constructed, it would have significant benefit to the trade imbalance that we currently have with Asia, because that's really the market that the Alaska LNG project will be feeding into. We're not going to be feeding into Europe because it's too far to transit. We have the proximity benefit of being closer to Asia, so we can knock off days, if not weeks, of transit time from Alaska to Asia as opposed to the lower 48 and the Gulf Coast. And so that is one of the main benefits that we see, is developing this project to be able to provide a resource that will help those Asian economies to migrate from their coal-fired power generation to a cleaner burning fuel. And then ultimately, as Alaska is downstream from those environments, we'll see then the environmental benefits to us through reduced greenhouse gas emissions and hopefully reduced ocean acidification and air pollution that's occurring as we get those pollutants dumped on us, specifically in Alaska. Now, the project will spur a tremendous amount of American manufacturing. We're going to need new equipment, we're going to need American steel, we're going to need American products to be able to roll into the state to be able to develop the project. So that will hopefully then continue America's manufacturing progress in helping to develop major resource projects within the nation. And then American workers will be needed to be able to round out the labor demands for this project, because Alaskans, there aren't enough of us to fill all the jobs that will be required specifically in some of the trade areas. So this, again, fits right into the current administration's push for energy dominance, and we feel that it would be a tremendous boon to America to do this. Now, if you may have heard in the news yesterday, Prime Minister from India, a guy by the name of Prime Minister Modi, is coming to America and actually held a rally for Prime Minister in Houston, and they called it Howdy Modi. And so they filled up Texas Stadium with 50,000 people to welcome and show that Texans can provide energy to, the 1 billion people of India. And so it's my goal that hopefully one day we would have that opportunity to show those Asian markets that Alaskans can fill that need as well. So next slide, please, Jomo.
One second, Bob. There we go.
Okay. So again, to Fairbanks in specifics, the benefits, again, the connection to the interior gas utility would be one of the main positives, to be able to provide, again, North Slope gas at good cost to the interior, to be able to reduce on your home heating and power generation costs. The benefits would be, again, through construction-related activities in the community with job creation, some slight increase in your population, likely during the time frame of construction. But part of the impacts of the project is we see that there would not be a tremendous amount of recreational impacts to your community and to the surrounding area. And then ultimately, when we get to field operations, regional jobs of about 300 people, so that's some well-paying long-term jobs that would be available within Fairbanks. And then as we look to the surrounding area, the way that we would we are constructing the pipeline is to try and minimize the impact of the environment, specifically to your two major river systems on the Yukon and Tanana. We're going to be drilling underneath those, so we would not be having impacts to the fisheries and recreational activities along those river systems during construction.
This line
Next slide,
this line is predominantly buried, is it not?
This line is buried except for major earthquake fault crossings and one aerial river crossing on the Nenana north of Denali National Park.
We have several questions.
Okay, Go ahead.
Frank, Rick Soley, wondered if you could talk a little bit about the thinking on how you're going to get the gas into Fairbanks. As you know, there's been lots of discussion about a lateral line over periods of time, and then how that cost would be reflected, whether that would be absorbed in the larger line or somehow a local hookup fee. If you could discuss that for a minute. And then the other thing would be the thinking on pricing for gas, how you would arrive at the price in Fairbanks. It's a net back type of thing, or just what you're considering.
Good questions, Rick. Thank you. So to the first one, if you remember when the Alaska LNG was formed with the producers, the project did not include a lateral into Fairbanks. It included an offtake to allow Fairbanks to be able to get gas, but no commitment for a lateral line. Under AGDC's Alaska Standalone Pipeline Project, we actually designed and permitted a 30-mile lateral coming off of Chattanooga and coming up over Murphy Dome and coming into the community. So we have now, as AGDC, a permitted lateral that would be able to provide Fairbanks with gas under the Alaska Standalone Project. So under our statutes, we were directed to be able to provide gas to the Fairbanks and the North Star Borough as one of our prime drivers going forward. So that's why we continued on with the Alaska Standalone Pipeline Project to get that permitted and to have that permit in hand for future development. So as we now move forward with the Alaska LNG project, we have the lateral design and permitted in place. Depending on what the ultimate makeup is for the project developers going forward, AGDC participation would be that we would have that line essentially ready to go, ready to construct. Now, how this is going to work in regards to the economics of the project have yet to really be determined. We had a concept initially. We had a concept up until last year, but now we are changing, and we're looking to have additional investors come in, international oil companies be able to come into the project to be able to develop this and ultimately get gas flowing. So what this will ultimately mean, and the commitment for the gas price to Fairbanks, is still yet to be determined. I wish I had a specific answer to give you, but at this time it's still fluid.
Okay, appreciate that clarity and transparency, and obviously it's a big deal for Fairbanks, and we'll make sure that we articulate that as we comment on the project in the comment period.
Thank you.
Frank, this is Jim. Follow up on Rick's question. You talked about some of the efficiencies in construction, working with the producers on things like modules and new technology that they have come up with. Do you see? Do you have any estimates on the cost of that 30-mile lateral?
We did develop a cost estimate for the 30-mile lateral under Alaska LNG, or under the ASAP project. So it was a 12-inch line, about 30 miles. I'm sorry, Jim, I don't have that right off the top of my head, but I can get that to you. So,
And
it's,
any efficiencies in new construction techniques?
So in new construction techniques, what I was really talking about is what the producers and what other LNG developers are experiencing is a great move towards modularization. So what I'm talking about is, as we've experienced on the North Slope, all the materials, most of the heavy materials come in over West Dock and have to come in during the open water season because, you know, the haul road is not going to be able to handle 5,000-ton modules that would not fit through our highway network. So what the original design premise was that the North Slope gas treatment plant would be a modular construction, while the Alaska LNG liquefaction facility in Nikiski was going to be mostly stick-built. But what we're seeing is that there's an opportunity to integrate more modulars into the LNG facility to be able to reduce costs. And one of the projects most watched was the Yamal development in northern Russia, where they had they had, I think, 10 or if not 12 module yards working in collaboration with each other to develop those modules that had to be just similar to our North Slope development, put on barges, shipped during open water season, and then offloaded to be able to develop their facilities. So that major development has created some very significant cost reducers that we hope to be able to monetize.
And then Rick's second question, which was the price of the gas in the line, you know, for Alaskans specifically as it might relate to Fairbanks.
So we've, again, a somewhat of a sensitive topic. AGDC signed gas purchase agreements with BP and Exxon last year, where they committed to supplying gas to the Alaska LNG project with AGDC as the developer of the project. Those gas sales agreements are in place, so they give us a foundation price that the producers have said they would be willing to accept for the development of the project. The market that we're looking to, as I said, is Asia. And so when you look at prices, long-term or even short-term prices in Asia, you see that they are significantly depressed right now, with prices anywhere in the $6 to $7 range delivered during summer, but when you get into the wintertime, they're creeping up. Those long-term contracts are being, there's a whole shift in the market towards more shorter-term contracts and more liquidity or fluidity in the overall sale of LNG, as you have portfolio players such as Shell and ExxonMobil out there with multiple sources feeding into those. So for us, we were originally targeting $8 as a landed price in Asia, but that's not necessarily going to be economic. We need to reduce that. And so that's the work that we did this spring with BP and Exxon, with a reduced overall construction cost, as well as with some of the incentives that AGDC as a state corporation can bring to bear. We are now targeting, you know, below that $8, and I'll call it the $6 to $8 range. Now that is landed price in Asia. So when you back that up to Alaska, you've got shipping costs associated with that. You've got a liquefaction cost associated with that. So the gas to Alaskans is going to be less than the landed price in Asia. What it's actually going to be in individual communities, I can't tell you right now, Jim, because we haven't worked that out.
Frank, solely again, just to kind of drill down on that, and thanks for, we understand you don't know prices per se, but the concept, I think, is what we're most desirous of understanding. And if the thought is that the areas along the pipeline, that Alaska gets natural gas at kind of a net back basis, that is, you tracked off costs of transporting it out, then yeah, we're going to have a less expensive commodity here, and that's what we would hope and plan for, and that's kind of what we're just looking for that, if that's what you're modeling now, as opposed to, you know, gas is priced at $8 in Fairbanks and in Asia. That would be a big bummer.
Right, and that's not our concept going forward, Rick. We've talked in the past about, you know, postage stamped rates, so if the gas that's flowing the postage stamp rate of 50 cents, and that's the same postage stamp rate that you pay in Cantwell and Healy and Matsuboro and Nikiski. So that has still
That's
the
a good concept, Frank. That means you guys would pay for the lateral.
I understand that, Jim. That's always been the
That's our plan.
how do I say this? It's been the goal of Fairbanks for that.
We'll hold you to it, Frank.
Okay. We've heard you loud and clear, Jim.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Okay, any more questions or I'll move on?
Mr. Wells, you would, okay. All right, looks like we're covered. I'll move forward, Frank.
Okay, slide 10, really just give you an update. In Denali National Park, I just wanted to, this is one of the main issues that we've addressed most recently. Our original concept on both of our projects was to not go through Denali National Park, but to go around it on the east side of the Nana River. That was a very challenging alignment due to the need for a long horizontal directional drill to go through the mountain, essentially behind Glitter Gulch. With Senator Murkowski's amendments on the land bill early this year and President Trump's signing of that, it gave us the opportunity to go through Denali National Park without having to comply with Title 11 of ANILCA. And that was always the major environmental permitting risk for ourselves or for the producers, was Title 11 of ANILCA. So with that now gone away, we decided to change our route to go through the park in compliance with that law that allows us to be in close proximity to the park's highway. We have about a 6-mile route through the park that would come across from the pedestrian bridge on the north side, traverse mostly parallel to the park's highway, and then dive out of the park and cross over the Nana River before getting to McKinley Village. So what this does is it lowers the construction risk significantly. It lowers the construction cost overall, and what we have right now is a supportive environment with the National Park Service that has a law that dictates that the line can go through the park, and ultimately they would see hopefully benefit because they want to have access to natural gas for their needs as well as their future transportation needs for gas-fired buses. So we took that as a major positive, and it's been supportive by the community and, as I say, by the park and friends of the park. So next slide, please, Jim. So where are we now in this process? As I said, we've completed our pre-feed. That gave us, again, I'll call it a 25% level of design for the project. The design premise that was worked on with BP, Exxon, and Conoco is the same design premise that AGDC is working on. We took all of that effort. We put it into an application to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who has the responsibility for siting and authorizing construction of liquefaction facilities in the United States. So why is FERC then the lead agency on this pipeline and gas treatment plant? Is because it was bundled as an LNG integrated project to include the gas treatment, the pipeline, and the liquefaction facility. And that was done by the producers originally, and we continued on with that concept. So what this slide represents is our application at the time was about 100,000 pages, and so that's what you see here with 3 stacks of 3-ring binders. But subsequently, FERC has asked us additional environmental and engineering data requests, so we fed that information to them, revised our plans, come up with new concepts, and to be able to meet the environmental concerns that are being FERC is pushing forward. That whole process, once FERC accepted the application, initiated an environmental impact statement. So in 2017, they accepted it. They published our schedule for the environmental impact statement, where we had draft EIS published in June of this year. That's now out for public comment. It's a 90-day public comment period. FERC's normal time frame is usually 30 days, so they're very process-oriented, and so they allow a little bit of time for the public to comment. But since we have a large project, they expanded it to 90 days. That's out there now for the public to review and then ultimately comment on. We have seen members of the Fairbanks community writing in their letters of support to this project, and we have greatly appreciated that. What FERC has also done is they came into Alaska over the last week and held public meetings around the state and including Fairbanks. So there was one last Thursday at the Morris Thompson Center, lightly attended, but those that came voiced their support for the project. So what we have in front of us, though, is once FERC closes the public comment period, they will start drafting the final environmental impact statement. And as I said, they're prescribed so that they've set a date now for when they're going to publish that, and that's June of 2020. We're not seeing that there's any rationale or reason why FERC will miss this target date. And then by their own regulations, 90 days after the EIS is published, they'll be providing a FERC authorization to construct, or a FERC order, by June of 2020. And that's really the emphasis area that we have been working on, is to accomplish and receive that FERC order to AGDC by June of 2020. Now, this is where BP and ExxonMobil have kicked in their funding for us to complete this, because they still see that there's value to this project going forward, and they've put the money to support the project, to support AGDC in completing the efforts. So next slide, please, Jomo. So as I said, the FERC meetings were held across the state from Barrow, or formerly Barrow, Utqiagvik, to Nuiqsut, to Trapper Creek in Houston, Alaska, down to Nikiski, and including Fairbanks and Anchorage. As I said, it was fairly lightly attended. About 111 people showed up. The vast majority of those showed up in Nikiski. That represented 0.0014% of Alaska's population. Of those that attended, only 33 elected to provide their public comments in those meetings, but 95% of those folks that commented supported the project, and they supported the LNG facility in Nikiski. So overall, even though it was a light showing, we still had support coming in from Alaska's voicing the need to move forward and get this project constructed for the long-term benefit of Alaskans and accessing those vast North Slope resources. Now, there were some folks that said not in my backyard, and those were specifically around the pipeline alignment down in Nikiski, because a individual neighborhood didn't want the pipeline to impact their pristine part of Alaska. So we can understand that, but FERC will make that decision and not AGDC. And then we see some of the environmental NGOs, non-governmental entities, that are voicing some of their concerns about the project, and their attitude is, let's keep it in the ground. So hopefully they will not have that much sway with FERC going forward, but it will be helpful for Alaskans to identify their desire for this project, or this project and how it will benefit Alaska. So next slide, please, Jumo.
Hold on one second, Frank.
This is Sean Lauer with the Operating Engineers. We recognize that this one from labor was probably not quite as on the radar as the GMT2. I was the same night, was in Anchorage testifying at that one. But we're addressing that in-house in our union meetings and such, to try to make sure we hit the write-in campaigns here as well. But for some reason, it doesn't seem like this one hit the broadcast. Like, the Alliance is usually pretty good about putting stuff out. Jim's pretty good about putting stuff out. But for whatever reason, this one didn't. It showed up on the radar a long time ago, several months ago. And it's, my personal bad for not making sure that we were on top of it as well for the operators. I can't speak about the other crafts. So we're aware of it, and we're addressing it, personally in-house, because we do see the benefit not only for the environmental section of things, but in the name of jobs as well.
Well, thank you, Sean. I mean, that's, you're voicing a concern that many have said across the state, and from AGDC's perspective, these meetings that were held were FERC, or Federal Energy Regulatory Commission meetings, and their process is not as inclusive as you maybe saw, like on the Willow project with the Bureau of Land Management, where it was highly advertised on various media opportunities. But FERC, they published it once in the Federal Register, and they didn't do anything else. So we tried behind the scenes to be able to let folks know that it was coming about, but again, there was lots of competing options for folks to be able to do on those nights.
Thank you.
So next slide, please, Jimmo. So FERC had the public meetings. They were open for public testimony to provide input directly to the FERC staff. But there are other opportunities to do that, either through a letter form directly to the secretary at FERC, or there's a website where you can provide your e-comments like the individual in Fairbanks did previously. Comes across as a text message, but it goes into the record nevertheless, and either shows support or opposition to the project. So we're out there trying to identify to folks, if you believe in the project, if you believe in resource development and the opportunities that this project could provide to Alaska, please let FERC know your thoughts. We at AGDC had developed, pulled information directly from the environmental impact statement, looking at the socioeconomic issues around it in terms of jobs and socioeconomic benefits of the project. We provided that last week in discussions with the Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce, and I'd be glad to provide it through JOMO to you all. It just gives some potential talking points or writing points that is addressed specifically in the DIS. Because what FERC really wants to see coming in as letters is on specifics. They get a lot of letters that just say, hey, I like this. But when they get specifics, then it kind of ticks a box for them, and they can then drill down more and provide that in their environmental review that folks are talking about specifics in the process. So the deadline for these comments is next Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, FERC set that as a 90-day window. I do understand that if the window is missed, though, FERC does take those comments into consideration after October 3rd. But I hope that Alaska will meet the challenge. We have support from not only the state administration with Governor Dunleavy, but our congressional delegation going forward. And so we feel that this project has great success coming out of the FERC process.
Frank, this is Jim.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, Frank, this is Jim. You say specifics. Usually when you talk about specifics in environmental impact statements, it's a negative specific. Do you have any suggestions for positive specifics?
Yes, that's what I'll provide through JOMO.
Oh,
okay.
Actually, Frank, so I went into the Chamber of Commerce packet, pulled out the bullet sheet that had been provided there. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay. So everybody, I did pass out some hard copies. That's what's there on the chair if anybody wants to take one. Otherwise, you can contact me again. I have it pulled and I'll email it to you. But again, those are the level of specifics you're talking about. Yeah.
Exactly. We just not randomly. We reviewed the document and thought what would trigger some response or positive inclination by FERC, and so we wanted to address some of the socioeconomic benefits of the project, not necessarily negative impacts, but positive benefits.
So,
Anything?
Frank,
Go ahead.
so under Governor Walker, when he was out promoting the gas pipeline,
he accumulated several, if not a dozen or so, letters of intent to purchase the gas. Are those still valid today?
Yes. So what? And I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, but what the speaker's talking about is AGDC, in addition to Governor Walker, had gone to the Asian markets and talked to folks in Japan and Korea and China and Thailand and other Asian countries, and actually talked to folks who wanted to purchase LNG and actually look for some long-term commitments. And so we received what are known as letters of intent. And so that's kind of the initiation process of a commercial agreement that would ultimately end in an LNG purchase and sales agreement. So those ranged from our very large joint development agreement with China and the company Sinopec to smaller developers in Thailand and Indonesia. And so those letters of intent, some have timed out due to the termination clause, but many of those are still in place. So we are still in negotiations, commercial discussions, not only with potential future developers of the project, but also those future markets.
Follow up?
Go ahead, Frank, or is this it?
This is it, Jim. I'm, again, just wanted to provide an update on the Alaska LNG project, who we are, what we are doing, what our goal is to achieve over the next year, and ultimately how we can best monetize those vast resources on the North Slope and provide energy to Alaskans and to Asia.
Sounds good, Frank. We will circulate this so that you not only have the contact information for FERC, but also have the bullet point paper, to help them get a letter started. I guess I wouldn't see the low response as necessarily the attitude from Alaskans about the project, but it has been a long discussion, as you recognize, I'm sure.
Yes. We see, letters coming in to the docket on a daily basis. Today was the Kenai Economic Development Corporation provided a letter. So again, as we've reached out to folks, appreciate them responding in kind to FERC.
Now, before you go, Frank, let me ask those on the phone, does anybody on the phone have a question for Frank?
Yeah, I've got a question. Jim Sackett here. Frank, is it a true statement that the ASAP line is permitted and ready to go? We could start construction tomorrow if we chose to go that route.
Good morning, Jim. The ASAP project is permitted. We have a state right-of-way grant given to us by the Department of Natural Resources. We have a right-of-way with the Bureau of Land Management, and we have feed-level engineering that is in place. The outcome of the supplemental environmental impact statement that we received earlier was an authority to construct. So we have an Army Corps 404 permit. Now, what it would take would be funding to be able to accomplish that task.
What are the differences in...
Go ahead, Jim.
Yep.
That's it. I just wanted to confirm the permitting is complete.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Frank, what are the differences in configuration between the two projects, be it ASAP or Alaska LNG?
Okay. The ASAP project has a gas conditioning facility in Prudhoe Bay. And so the terminology is gas conditioning would condition the gas, remove the CO2 down to pipeline quality gas, which could have a small constituent of CO2 up to 3%. The Alaska LNG project has a gas treatment plant which removes essentially 99.9% of the CO2 because you don't want CO2 in your LNG because It'll produce ice blocks and gum up the works in the LNG plant. ASAP was to deliver gas to Alaskans, and so that's why we didn't go to that much more refined treatment on the North Slope. So the gas conditioning facility and the gas treatment plant actually are coincidentally located on the exact same plot of land in Prudhoe Bay. Then the pipeline that would lead from that facility heading south, the ASAP project is a 36-inch diameter pipeline, and the Alaska LNG project is a 42-inch diameter pipeline. The difference on the pipeline configurations is ASAP, there's one compressor station as part of that gas conditioning facility on the North Slope, and none else along the entire route leading to South Central Alaska. So the flow on that project, we were limited to design of 500 million standard cubic feet a day, while as the Alaska LNG project will be flowing up to 3.3 billion standard cubic feet a day. And so we'll need to have 8 compressor stations along the line to promote that flow leading into the liquefaction facility. And then the final difference, or the remaining difference is ASAP terminates where it connects in with the NSTAR facility in Anchorage and has a lateral leading into Fairbanks, while the Alaska LNG project crosses Cook Inlet to a terminus at the LNG plant in Nikiski, and then does not have a lateral associated with it leading into Fairbanks. Too much
Thank
detail?
you, Frank.
No, that was great. Thank you.
Okay.
Frank?
Yes, sir.
Jim Sackett here again. If you added compressor stations to the ASAP line, could you increase the flow through that?
Yes, you can. So what Jim's talking about is increasing the flow through additional compression. And so the ASAP project was designed, the pipeline was designed with a maximum allowable operating pressure of 1,480 psi, while the Alaska LNG project operating pressure on that pipeline is 2,075. And the difference is really the grade of steel. So you could actually change the grade of steel on the ASAP project, you could add compression, and you could nearly reach the same amount of flow as the Alaska LNG project.
So if you're using the same steel and roughly the same number of compressor stations, what would the cost difference be between the two projects?
So Jim, are you looking at ASAP without a liquefaction facility and a Cook Inlet crossing? I just need to know what the concept would be.
Well, if you didn't have the liquefaction, you can't export, right?
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct. Well, I mean,
Okay.
there is an existing liquefaction facility in Nikiski, but its output is about 1 million tons per year, as opposed to the 20 million tons per year that we're trying to accommodate.
So if you didn't have the liquefaction, the goal would be to get cheap energy to Alaskans, and if you have it, it's cheap energy to everything on the Pacific Rim.
That's correct.
Which I assume makes it more affordable for everyone if you're exporting some of it, because the volume you're going to be doing, you'll be able to get it for a cheaper price.
Lower cost per unit, absolutely.
So apples to apples, then let's assume liquefaction for both projects.
Okay, 20 billion. 20 billion for the liquefaction facility.
Okay.
And then if you have the same gas treatment to an LNG quality spec, you're in the range of 10 to 11 billion for the gas treatment facility. So then it's really, the difference is in the pipeline cost of 36 plus compression versus 42 plus compression.
Okay. Thank you, Frank.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Okay, before we wrap up, any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Frank, thank you. Great information, good presentation. We certainly appreciate your time. Please always remember you're welcome in Fairbanks. you know, we'd love to have you visit, and we'd be glad to put on another, dog and pony show for you, so, call anytime.
And thank
Okay,
you
Jim,
all for
I
your
do it.
doing efforts.
Thank you all. All right, signing off.
All right, thank you, sir. Hey, before everyone leaves, a quick announcement. So, you see here, there's a box. You all saw my little notice on your notice. The USO and others are collecting items for care packages for deployed service members. They'll be sending it out in October. October 26th is actually the day they'll be boxing them up and sending them out. And so I hoped, as we go through our Tuesday morning meetings, you might feel free to take a look at the list, bring some stuff. I will let you know that as of today, the broke young whippersnappers at YPC are outpacing my energy committee. So let's see if we can catch back up and beat those kids. So thank you very much.
Can we get a copy of their presentation?
Yes, copy of the presentation as well as, oh, and yes, of course, anyone who wants the printout of the positive points, just email me and I'll send it out to you.
Why don't you just send it out?
Because it doesn't attach to the system. I'll see if I can make it work, so.
Say that again.
It doesn't, this thing allows, the system we use for notifications allows you to upload images, essentially graphics.
Yeah.
So I would just have to turn this into a graphic if I was going to actually attach it to a boomerang notice.
So you can print that out and then put it into our copy machine and make a image out of it.
PDF.
I could, sir.
Well, I know it's complicated.
I'll get it out, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Now that we've got that recorded. All right, everybody, have a great day.
Call IT.